So I'm Miikka Luotio. I work as the Director of Developer Outreach at Tilting Point. I've been in the industry for a few years now, and I'm from Finland originally. I'm based in Finland myself. I basically saw the rise of smartphones, starting from this little tiny handset I made my first game on. That was really exciting. A lot of restrictions, but a lot of fun at the same time. But we've come a long way. I mean, look at 2016. Look at what we have. So I'm still making games for those, and probably a lot of you guys have also seen the feature phones. So we've come a long way. Yeah. So today, in a nutshell, I'm gonna talk about the market realities a little bit. Then kind of defining different services, aka features of publishers. Then I'm going to talk about how to find a publisher, how to seduce one, and also what's the competition out there. So what kind of trying to show you guys what are the different publishers and how they operate out there. So you kind of can understand, because there's different types. So there's a lot of different animals when it comes to publishers out there. So they operate different ways, they have different terms, and they prefer different type of deals. So kind of want to explain that a little bit. As you guys know, in mobile games, the success barriers are rising, especially on the free-to-play. So top 100 grossing is it's very hard to get your game into the top 100 grossing these days. It's mostly dominated by developers and publishers who held their place for a long time. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 2017 it's even harder. So as more and more games get released every month, I mean, look at 2016. Sorry about actually have the Finnish language month names there, so you probably, but they're actually months. So in 2016, just look at that. That's crazy. So imagine, try to imagine there in parallel how many publishers are active through the years. And it's a pretty steady number in terms of how many publishers have been operating since 2010. But the rise of mobile games in relation to how many publishers are out there actually is totally off base. So there's way less publishers out there than there are developers. So that's something that creates a situation where there's so many games to choose from. So in order to find a good publishing partner, is harder and harder because you're competing with more and more developers who are submitting their games to publishers. So it's getting more and more fierce in that sense. So it's really important now, if you're interested in finding a publisher, to really know how to find the right one. And obviously, going alone is daunting. So, I mean, self-publishing, you can do it and you can try it, but it is daunting. If you do it, it is very daunting, and it usually requires a lot of resources, a lot of people that you have to hire that may not actually do anything with game development. So finding a partner can give you a feeling of comfort, and you're not doing it alone, which sometimes can be good. So where do you find a publisher? So most of the time, publishers go to conferences like this one. So that's where most of actual games that we source today come from, at least from my experience working with multiple publishers through my career. I know conferences are very important, especially the ones that have pitch and match systems are super handy because a lot of publishers actually go to the ones that have a good pitch and match system because it just makes easier to find developers, and it also makes it easier for you to find the right partner. So I just named some examples that, in my personal opinion, I think are pretty good in terms of finding cool games. So about 45% of those come from conferences, and that means 45% of the titles that we get yearly. On the other side, there's friends and family, so introductions. That's really big part. So if you know a friend who's a developer who's working with a publisher, you can get a first-hand story from your friend, and it's easier to trust that partner because of that. So you can also do game competitions. That's a great way to just get your game some attention. You can do Steam Early Access. A lot of people are doing this more and more, so that's kind of good. People do see that. They actually follow the news. You can do Kickstarters. That's a good way to kind of get visibility to your game, whether or not it's going to get funded, but at least you'll get visibility. On the passive side of things, I think this is where a lot of new things are happening. So more and more publishers are looking through Google Early Access on a weekly basis. So Google Early Access is a very good way for you to passively be out there, not having to do a full soft launch. But basically publishers go through there and they go through those games. I do every week. I play through those games and I just contact the developers if I find a cool game. Touch Arcade forums are really good, actually. So I know a lot of publishers actually go through the forums. So it's a great place to just put your game in there, get noticed. And obviously the usual suspects, making iOS soft launch. A lot of publishers use tools like App Annie to sort out new promising entries in soft launch. Mostly it's automated, but it's, obviously that'll get you attention, and social media as well, using Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatnot. Yeah, so what are the features of a publisher? So I think I tried to divide this into 3 categories. So most publishers offer user acquisition, to help you with user acquisition. They will help you with marketing, platform relations, live ops, customer care and support. So that's very generally, you find that publishers do that, most of the publishers at least. Then quite commonly, you can also find services, publishers out there who offer services like cross-promotion on their existing games portfolio, PR, CRM, quality assurance, funding, getting development funding, even design and production expertise. And finally, you got the unicorn features. That these are kind of new developments in the scene of publishing, I would say. So obviously influencers is a big way to market, big channel to get players in your game these days. So a lot of publishers want to be owning that and understanding that, because they have the manpower and usually the funds to kind of pull in influencers. So you're seeing more and more of that, where publishers are helping facilitate developers find the right influencers to get some nice influencer campaigns going. Also, publishers are more and more, there's a few of them. This is still a rare feature of sorts, but a lot of publishers help with finding licenses. If, let's say, in a case where you have a really great game, you have great KPIs, it's in soft launch, but you know the CPI is going to be high for your game. So, okay, how do you bring that down? There's quite often, if you put a known license to it, can be a TV movie or a real famous person or something, and if you are able to put that license in your game, that'll just help you lower your CPI quite often. So some publishers are interested in doing that because that's obviously an easy way to market the game with less investment, or more cheaper. Co-development as well, where publishers might have, some publishers, there's just a few of them, it's pretty rare, but they might have ability to actually assist in development. Yeah, so when do you actually approach a publisher? So there's different stages. I mean, this is generally what most mobile games go through. So you have a concept phase, milestones in a pre-beta level, beta and early access, and soft launch. So essentially, the closer to you get soft launch, the likely you are to get picked up by a publisher. Mainly because the closer you are to a global launch, the lower the investment cost for a publisher is going to be. So if a publisher signs with you in a concept phase, they are basically putting a lot of investment to you and your team and the game, because it'll just take longer for that game to actually go to market and actually produce revenue. So that's pretty common equation. So I think it's no rocket science there. But timing is really everything. So you really want to think about when do you actually want to send your pitch in, because even if you're super excited about your game, and you might really want to show it in beta already, sometimes it's worth waiting and showing it in early access, for example. But then there's also a caveat with early access, well, I'll talk about in the next slide, which basically means that if you do it in early access, a lot of publishers will expect you to have KPIs that you can actually show, and you can show the learnings that you have. What are your strengths in your game based on the data, based on the metrics? What are the weaknesses? So you need to kind of be prepared for that. So you need to have a way to actually get good data. So you need to have a plan for that if you pitch your game during an early access. If you pitch it on a beta, obviously you have no metrics. So in some cases, it might be better to push out during beta. In general, what's expected from you when you pitch in certain stages? I kind of listed here some key things. In a concept and pre-beta phase, it's all about mostly the team. So you're selling the team. Most of the people who are interested in you when you're starting your concept are going to be interested in getting equity or acquiring your company, because there's no game yet, but the team might be experienced. So there's not a lot of publishers out there who are really looking for games like that. So you might be better off looking at some VCs and funding and whatnot. Yeah, and obviously at beta, expectations start ramping up. So you will have more expectations in terms of presenting more than just the game. You actually have to present the game, show that you can do a feature complete, that it's can scale the game, and the game can be good in long term as well, in terms of fun. And you also have to indicate a roadmap, a clear goal, where do you want to take the game, and a clear budget. Yes. And how do some do's and don'ts? I mean, this is common sense, really. There's not a lot of don'ts. You know, pretty much everything you do, you can't do wrong, as long as you just keep a common sense in you. Just respond to emails frequently. And I would say that don't call publishers in the middle of the night. I have been called at 2 a.m. by a game developer who woke me up and made a pitch. And even before I was able to say, like, dude, in my time zone, it's 2 a.m. And I got a 30-minute pitch going. It was actually a good pitch. But yeah, that I didn't sleep that night too well. But, common sense. And obviously, cold calls might work. But if you really want to do a cold call, you want to have a reason for it. Let's say you heard something good about the publisher or something, and then, or do you know somebody who knows them? So that's always better. Yeah, so a little bit about how publishers evaluate games. So I've tried to generalize as much as possible because every publisher does this differently. But usually they can sign and evaluate your game in 1 to 2 months from the first pitch, which is the meet stage. Sometimes even faster, depending on your situation. Most of publishers have an expedited deal flow to involve all the people faster if needed. Sometimes game pitches I've seen getting kind of in a limbo between the first and full evaluation, and that usually happens because there's this lack of confidence, full confidence on the game, even if it might be a really cool, fun game, but it's just missing something. And usually at that stage, most deals go to this limbo stage, and the publisher might be like pretty passive about it, but doesn't mean that they are not interested. It quite often means that they're just waiting for the next milestone. So you gotta be super clear with publishers what are your milestones? When to expect things? So I would also encourage that speed isn't everything. It's rather, well, time isn't everything. It's rather quality. So publishers are not in a hurry quite often. They can afford to wait. So if you have a really good build in a month, it's better than a almost really good build in 2 weeks. So talking about a little bit about how publishers are divided these days. So starting with traditional publishers, it's kind of hard to categorize. So imagine these emoticons here. They are different publisher companies, right? So traditional publishers who kind of end up more or less owning the identity of the developer. So even if a developer gives up revenue, development, creative ownership will remain with the publisher. And traditional publishers sometimes fund initial development, but can sever their contract and are not obligated to pay in full sometimes. And traditional publishers often have competing internal interests, other development studios, for example, and may deprioritize you or defund you based on new stuff that they get. Then you have the loan sharks, who basically own the capital. You have the user acquisition consultants and loan providers can only offer funding in quite many cases, rarely can offer analytic insights, or actually use a third party for analytics. They don't have that in-house, without an additional fee as well. Traditional banks and angel investors will often charge interest or structure repayment based on revenue, equity, rather than profit. Neither supercategory of lenders have the technical capabilities to scale software development as well, so something to consider. Then you have these publishing specialists that kind of own the hype in a way. So these specialists utilize trendy and non-traditional services because they might lack in technical development or publishing competencies. Their services usually do not guarantee results. Still, the specialists quite often will require equity and may leave the developers competing against studios. When faced with a technical or resource impasse, specialists will charge usually extra costs to outsource even. And then last but not least, I think a lot of you probably saw that coming. We're kind of uniquely positioned here. So there's others, and I expect that there's going to be more publishers that are uniquely targeting the market in terms of publishing this year. So I wouldn't be surprised to see new companies popping up. But in general, at Tilting Point, our mission is developer first, publisher second, basically. And our user acquisition funding and marketing campaign management based on profit sharing, not equity ownership. We're independent funding and non-competing studios. Eliminate the conflict of interests, so we don't have that. And we have a fully professional marketing service team, technology stacks, expertise, and seasoned development resources as well. And I think the philosophy that we drive through is kind of new. I wanted to explain that as well, because quite often publishers want to use, you kind of steal the light, steal the thunder from the developer, and you kind of put their name in the limelight, and that's very much what we don't want to do. So we want to keep the identity of the game with the developer. So, but I expect probably more companies coming into that field as well, but at least we have a few years of a head start. In a nutshell, Tilting Point wants to keep the developer, wants to have the developer retain the master of their own destiny. All right, thank you.